Hello, UCAR. Peter Christensen here, coming to you from the CEO's desk. Going to do a viewer request today. Thanks, Jean, for the question. So she asked about 8.1, wanted to clarify what it is that the buyer is supposed to be doing during the due diligence condition or due diligence period. Now, I'll first off acknowledge there are other contingencies, many other contingencies that can be added. Some are in the REPC, some can be added afterwards. Those all affect the total picture of the contract, but today we are just talking about 8.1, the due diligence condition, and what is supposed to be done. Now, this changed, 13 years ago, pretty significantly. There used to be time periods, time for objection, time for resolution. That all changed in 07, 08 with the revamp of the REPC back then. So what are the requirements now? Well, let's look at it. In 8.1A, it lays out there are really two things the buyer is doing during the due diligence period. Number one is buyer will review the seller's disclosures, review and ultimately approve of the seller's disclosures. So you got to have those disclosures in with enough time for buyer to look at them, decide if there's any problem or ask more questions or investigate, and then ultimately say, I'm okay with that, or bail, as we'll talk about in a minute. The second thing is conduct any tests that the buyer wants to, conduct and approve of the results of those tests. So anything, and it lists off a bunch of possibilities in 8.1, but there are no end to those. Now, the trick is the buyer shall pay for and schedule and pick the inspectors for all of those tests. Any homework the buyer wants to do is on buyer's dime. Seller shall cooperate, agrees to cooperate, and then buyer will pay for any damages. If buyer's deciding I need to knock out walls, I need to look inside things, then buyer's got to cover any damages that occur. But ultimately, it's up to the buyer to conduct as much research, hire as many professionals as the buyer deems necessary. So then we get into, okay, by that deadline, what are the buyer's options? Well, look at 8.1B. Buyer's right to cancel or resolve objections. It's right there in the header. Two things buyer needs to accomplish. Either cancel, so they say, you know what, I'm okay with everything I've seen, the seller's disclosures, all the homework I've done, I'm okay. It satisfies me. I don't need to cancel. I'm ready to go forward. What happens then? Well, we go to 8.1C, and it says, what if buyer doesn't cancel? Then buyer shall be deemed to have waived the due diligence condition. Basically, I don't need it. I'm okay with the condition of the property. I'm ready to go forward. So the other thing in 8.1B is or resolve objections. So let's say the buyer does have an objection or two. Says, there are some things that are questionable to me based off of your disclosure, seller, and the research I've done. Now what is the buyer supposed to do? Well, buyer needs to either resolve those objections in writing. So whether it's a concession, seller agrees to knock a little off the price, throw a little towards closing costs, fix something, whatever, buyer needs to agree in writing before that deadline. Before that deadline, resolve the concerns. Why? Because by the time we get to the deadline, what did I tell you? If buyer didn't cancel, then buyer has waived their right to object after that. They've waived their right to object based off of due diligence. And if they've said, I'm okay with it. So buyer can go forward, saying everything's okay. Buyer can cancel, saying, nope, condition is just not what I want it to be, I'm out. Or buyer can resolve with seller in writing the objections. So they come to a resolution by that deadline, and they've got it in writing in the contract. Seller will do X to resolve buyer's concerns, and you're good to go. So those are really the three options by the deadline that the buyer has. So that means buyer's got to have their inspections. They've got to get the seller's disclosures all with enough time before that deadline to accomplish deciding if they're okay or resolving the objections. So you don't send over your list of objections at the deadline. You send them over days beforehand so that you have time to negotiate with the seller. And that was a big change from the pre-07-08 REPC revamp. There's no longer a negotiation period. It's all prior to that deadline. Hopefully that clarifies things with the due diligence deadline and the due diligence condition. It's a great one. Like I've said before, in Utah, the laws are awesome. If the seller discloses everything, buyer has ample time to do their homework, then the burden shifts to the buyer. That's why we put such an emphasis on doing that due diligence, is because as long as the seller discloses what they know, the burden shifts to the buyer and they take it as is after that. That's why we have such a strong condition in there and a strong out for the buyer, is you're getting it and you're stuck with it after that. Hopefully that helps. Thanks for tuning in. Remember, this is for legal information purposes only. If you need legal advice, please contact your attorney. Consider subscribing to this. If you like these videos, then you'll get an alert. I think you can check that little bell too, and you can get an alert anytime one of these drops. And check out our library. Gosh, we're almost to 100. We should do something when we get to 100. Celebrate. I don't know. Celebrate 100 videos. I don't know if that's the right word. But thanks for tuning in. You guys are great.